Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sarah Reynolds sat at the far end, her fingers brushing the edge of a folded map. Men leaned forward, voices heavy with certainty, confidence, bravado. Not a single one of them looked at her. She was the anomaly, the outlier, a woman in a room full of seals. She listened quiet, always listening, because silence had taught her more than shouting ever could. Lieutenant Jack Reeves pointed at the grainy satellite image, his voice steady with authority born from too many wars. High-value asset, hostile terrain, one shot at this. Nods circled the room, a ritual agreement. Still no one looked at her. Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't expect recognition anymore. She had learned to live without it. But the memory of it, those days when being the first woman to wear the SEAL trident meant she was watched, doubted, tested, still burned quietly inside her. Recognition hadn't come. Respect had been harder won. And yet here she was. Still standing. Still chosen. She ran a hand along her rifle case, feeling the cool steel. She trusted her rifle more than faces at this table. It never doubted her. It never looked away. The colonel entered then, Richard Hargrove. A legend draped in the quiet gravity of old wars. Even Reeves straightened. The air shifted. Maps became heavier. Silence stretched long enough that Sarah heard her own heartbeat. He placed an object on the table, an old radio, a relic, PRC-90, the kind of thing museums forgot in dusty drawers. Ghost channel, he said. If you're cut off, if everything goes wrong, this is your lifeline. The room scoffed in small ways. Men didn't trust ghosts. But Sarah noticed something in Hargrove's eyes. Not fear, not command, something else. Memory. And then he said it. You may hear a voice. If you do, trust it. The words brushed cold across Sarah's skin. A woman's voice, he meant. A sniper from another war. Elizabeth Carter. Sarah kept her eyes on him, unblinking, because she had heard whispers, not in classrooms, not in reports, in fire bases, in valleys, from men who swore an angel had pulled them out of hell with a rifle shot no one else could have made. Most laughed it off. But Sarah believed, or maybe she needed to. Because in the quiet corners of her mind she wondered if she would end up like that, forgotten, reduced to a ghost. A name erased, a file sealed, a woman carrying wars that never ended alone. The colonel didn't elaborate, he never did. He left them with mystery, weight, and an old radio no one wanted to touch. And then they were airborne. The Black Hawk thundered through Afghan night, its rotors cutting the thin mountain air. Inside, the team ran through rituals. Donovan adjusted radios with mechanical calm. Torres cleaned the edge of his knife. Reeves closed his eyes in a moment of stolen stillness. And Sarah, she cleaned her scope again and again. A nervous tick, but not for nerves, for control, for ritual, for the only thing in her life she could always trust. The Hindu Kush stretched below, jagged teeth in black shadow. Wind howled between peaks like an ancient thing that had never died. Sarah leaned against the window, scanning, as if the mountains themselves might whisper secrets. And then the world tore apart. An RPG streaked through the dark. Impact fire. The Black Hawk lurched violently, screaming like metal betrayed. Another impact shredded the tail. Brace, the pilot shouted. Sarah didn't pray. She had learned long ago prayers didn't stop bullets. She gripped the rifle case, closed her eyes, and thought of the silence after shots. That small, sacred silence when a bullet found its mark. The crash came in waves, metal ripping, snow exploding, flames swallowing the night. When Sarah opened her eyes, everything burned red. Smoke filled her lungs. The pilot was gone, limp, broken, still strapped. The team crawled, coughed, staggered out into mountain air. Cold cut like knives, but it was life. For now. Reeves barked orders. Perimeter comms check. Sarah dropped to her belly, scanning darkness through night vision. Her breath stilled as heat signatures flickered across the valley. Movement, organized, closing fast. 12, maybe more, she whispered. Her voice carried, steady, controlled. No one ignored her now. Reeves swore under his breath, "We move." Snow crunched under boots as they disappeared into the night. The crash glowed behind them, a beacon for enemies who didn't need a map. Hours later, dawn broke, purple light over jagged ridges. Sarah kept watch while the others dozed in brief, uneasy snatches of rest. She had always been better awake, better alone with her thoughts. Through her scope, she caught movement again. Convoy. 3 vehicles crawling along a broken road, dust rising like ghosts in the cold light. Her crosshairs steadied on the man in front, white beard, civilian clothes that fooled no one. Volkov. Sarah breathed slow. The name tasted like old stories, darker than anything in textbooks. Cold War predator, a man who didn't kill for politics but for lessons, to make examples. Doesn't look like much, she whispered. But she knew better. The most dangerous predators never did. When the team closed in on the compound later, Sarah set her rifle on its bipod, her body pressed to stone. She became stillness itself. Her rifle breathed for her. The world narrowed to scope and breath. And for a moment, she forgot they had ignored her. Because here, behind the scope, she was more than anomaly. She was inevitable. The operation began with fire. Torres' explosion painted the eastern sky orange. Shouts erupted, guards scattering like startled ants. Reeves and Donovan breached. Sarah's finger settled on the trigger, eyes unblinking. First guard tower, 1 shot. The man folded, body weightless in death. Main gate, another shot. 2 men staggered, one collapsing instantly. Her rifle cracked rhythm into the chaos. And the team moved because she carved their path. But even precision couldn't change numbers. The compound swelled with more men. Vehicles arrived. An ambush formed like storm clouds. Through her scope, Sarah caught sight of Volkov in a second-story window. Calm, watching, directing, like this was a lesson, not a fight. And something inside her twisted. Because for all her precision, all her discipline, she couldn't touch him. No angle, no line, he was untouchable. And she hated it. When the firefight turned against them, Reeves called retreat. They pulled Harrington beaten, half broken, through the breach. Sarah stayed last, squeezing the trigger again and again, her rifle covering their retreat. Every shot slowed pursuit. Every pull of the trigger was another second earned. And still it wasn't enough. The mountains swallowed them. The pursuit grew louder. And Sarah wondered, quietly, silently, if Hargrove's words were prophecy. That in these peaks, when the walls closed in, when death came certain and cold, they might hear a voice. But not hers. Not yet. Why wasn't anyone answering the radio? Static filled the night as they stumbled through snow and shadow. Donovan tried every frequency, his voice sharp with effort, but silence pressed back. Silence heavier than bullets. Sarah marched at the rear, rifle balanced, breath measured. Her eyes cut across the ridgeline, reading heat signatures that moved with too much discipline. This wasn't a mob. This was trained pursuit. And they were closing. Dr. Harrington stumbled, knees buckling in the snow. Donovan caught him. Reeves pressed forward, his face grim with calculation. No comms, no extraction, surrounded terrain. Sarah thought, we've been abandoned. The words lodged in her chest, familiar words, words she had lived before. That first deployment when her squad had left her behind during a retreat, assuming she couldn't keep up. They'd found her days later, alive, with 3 kills to her name. She hadn't spoken to any of them after that. Silence had been her answer. Now here, years later, the silence of the radio felt the same. Cold, cutting. Unforgiving. They reached a ravine and dropped into cover. Snow thickened. Their breaths came in clouds. Sarah unfolded her scope, scanning the darkness. "They're fanning out, flanking," she whispered. Reeves crouched beside her, eyes narrowing. He trusted her now. Funny how trust always came in blood and fire, never in briefing rooms. He gave the order, "Keep moving, northeast ridge. Widow's Peak if we have to." Widow's Peak. The words tasted wrong. Hargrove's warning slid back into Sarah's mind. The way his voice had faltered when he'd said, "You may encounter a ghost." Snow whipped harder, wind howled louder, and the mountains swallowed their tracks. For hours they climbed. Harrington stumbled, muttering about pain, about something stitched into his side. Torres gritted his teeth, carrying half his body weight on a leg that refused to heal. Donovan cursed softly at the radio. Reeves kept pushing, his jaw locked like stone. Sarah carried silence. It was heavier than her pack, heavier than her rifle. Because silence gave her too much room to think. What if this was it? What if their names would be forgotten, written in footnotes, buried under classified files? What if they all ended as shadows swallowed by a mountain range that had claimed armies before them? And then, a sound. Not wind, not snow. A voice. Cool, precise female. "Lieutenant Reeves, if you move now, you'll be dead in 7 seconds." The team froze. Sarah's heart stopped. "Who is this?" Reeves demanded, voice tight. "6 Taliban fighters. Ridge to your north, 2 RPGs, 1 sniper at your 2 o'clock. Range 800 meters, stay down." Before disbelief could settle, a rifle cracked. Not Sarah's, not anyone's near them. A distant shot, sharp, distinct. Sarah swung her scope, found the ridge, found the sniper's body slumped forward, rifle tumbling down into snow. Her mouth went dry. It wasn't possible. But it was happening. "Jesus," Donovan whispered. The voice returned, calm as winter. "Move east through the culvert. You have 58 seconds before their patrol reaches your position." Reeves demanded again, "Who the hell are you?" Silence then. "Ghost spotter." Sarah's hands shook, just slightly. She gripped her rifle harder. Ghost spotter, the myth. The phantom sniper whispered through 2 decades of rumors. Elizabeth Carter, dead, they had said. Gone, they had promised. A ghost. Sarah breathed slowly, grounding herself in discipline. She didn't want to believe in legends. But legends were shooting their enemies in the dark. Legends were keeping them alive. They moved fast, crawling through the culvert, snow soaking their uniforms, packs scraping stone. Sarah kept her rifle trained, but her mind wasn't steady. Why a woman's voice? Why her? And another question lingered like a bruise. If Ghost Spotter was real, what did that make her? For years, Sarah had been the woman SEAL. Not Sarah, not Reynolds, not sniper, not teammate. Always the woman, a token, an experiment, a question mark. Now, in the dark, another woman's voice commanded men without even standing in the room. A ghost had more authority than she did alive. They regrouped at the culvert's edge. Breath came heavy. Snow burned their skin. Reeves studied the shadows. Donovan kept working the dead radios. Harrington slumped against stone, shivering, whispering about the thing inside him. Sarah's eyes scanned north. She whispered almost to herself. "Why help us?" The wind swallowed her question. No answer came. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was haunted. By dawn, they had covered ground that should have taken days. Fear sharpened speed. Fear made strength from nothing. Harrington staggered. Torres limped. But Sarah walked steady, her rifle cold in her hands. When they collapsed into a shepherd's hut for shelter, Donovan whispered the truth. "We're being hunted, and someone's watching us. Both sides." Sarah sat at the doorway, staring at the mountains. The radio lay between them, a relic, a myth. And she wondered, when it spoke again, would it save them? Or would it pull them deeper into something they didn't understand? Sleep came in snatches. dreams of voices, dreams of a woman she had never met but somehow knew, Elizabeth Carter, a name not in books, a file sealed so deep it became rumor. Sarah woke with her heart pounding, rifle already in her hands. The storm outside howled, and in the howling she thought she heard something else. A breath between wind gusts, a whisper threaded through static. Her name. She froze, listened. Nothing, only wind. But her hands trembled, and she hated that. She wasn't supposed to tremble. Reeves stirred awake. His eyes met hers, steady, silent. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Because he knew. They all knew. The mountains weren't just filled with enemies. They were filled with ghosts. And Sarah didn't know if she was one of them yet. Why was the storm following them? Snow hammered the ridgeline as if the mountains themselves were trying to bury them alive. The team pushed forward in silence, each breath a knife, each step heavier than the last. Sarah's boots sank deep, muscles screaming, but her eyes never left her scope. Even in whiteout conditions she scanned, always scanned. Predators moved in storms. She knew that truth too well. Behind her, Harrington groaned, collapsing into the snow. Donovan cursed under his breath, dragging the scientist back up by his jacket. Reeves pressed on ahead, compass clenched in his glove, his jaw carved from stone. Torres hobbled, pale with pain but silent. Sarah's voice cut low, steady. Movement, 6 heat signatures, South Ridge. Reeves didn't even look at her this time. He trusted her eyes. Keep moving. The storm closed around them. Visibility fell to meters, but somehow their hunters still knew where they were. Sarah felt it, like breath on her neck, like crosshairs she couldn't see. She broke the silence, her voice tight with suspicion. They're tracking us. Harrington's eyes darted, his hand clamping his side. He whispered something Sarah barely caught. They put something inside me. The team froze. Sarah's rifle lowered slightly. What? Reeves demanded. Harrington's breath came ragged. Volkov, he cut me, said it was insurance, a device, a tracker. Donovan ripped open the man's shirt. A crude incision stretched across his ribs, stitched roughly. Sarah's stomach knotted. A scar that wasn't healing, it was humming with danger. Donovan swore softly. It's a locator, satellite link maybe, that's how they're on us. Cut it out, Torres growled. No time, Reeves snapped. His eyes darted to the storm. They're already here, we move. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to scream that dragging dead weight marked by a beacon was suicide, but she bit it back. Harrington's eyes, hollow, haunted, stopped her. She had seen that look before, men already breaking inside, trying not to. So she shouldered her rifle and moved. The storm roared. Shadows appeared in the white pursuers, muzzle flashes tore the snow. Bullets snapped past like angry hornets. Sarah dropped to her belly, breath slow, sight steady. One shot. A man folded into snow. 2 more tried to flank. Her rifle cracked twice. Both dropped. Her mind quieted in the storm. This was her world. This silence after the shot. This moment when only her breath mattered. But discipline couldn't mask math. For everyone she dropped, more moved closer. Shadows swelled like tidewater. Then, the radio hissed. Northwest flank, 2-man team advancing. Range 400 meters on my mark. Sarah froze. It was her, ghost spotter. Her words precise, clinical, cold. 3 seconds passed. A crack echoed from the storm, another. Through her scope, Sarah saw 2 figures collapse in perfect synchrony. Her throat tightened. Another woman had just saved them. The storm raged, but Sarah felt heat rise in her chest. Not gratitude, not awe, something sharper, jealousy. Because the impossible shots she wanted to make, shots she lived to prove possible, belonged to someone else. A ghost, a myth, a woman who wasn't even supposed to exist. And worse, her team looked to that voice now. Reeves listened. Donovan adjusted based on her calls. Even Torres, bleeding and pale, cracked a grim smile when the radio hissed alive. Sarah clenched her jaw, hiding the storm inside her chest. She wasn't about to be a shadow inside someone else's legend. Hours later, the storm broke. Gray daylight spilled over jagged peaks, painting the Hindu Kush in cruel beauty. They stumbled into the remains of a shepherd's hut, stone walls cracked and roof half collapsed. Inside, the cold bit less sharply. They lit a chemical heater. The small flame felt like civilization. Donovan worked on Harrington's wound. Torres gritted through his own pain. Reeves traced the map, his finger stopping at one place, Widow's Peak. Sarah studied him, last resort. His eyes met hers. Only resort. The words sank like stones in her chest. When the others dozed, Sarah stayed awake at the doorway, her rifle steady across her knees. She stared out at the valley, the endless ridges cutting the horizon. A silence stretched across her chest so heavy it hurt. And then the radio crackled again. "Fox Squad, your position is compromised. They're 20 minutes behind you." Sarah gritted her teeth. "You," she whispered into the dark. "Ghost spotter," the voice confirmed. Sarah closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "Why us? Why now?" Silence. "Then, because I remember what it feels like to be abandoned." Sarah's chest clenched. The words cut through her like wind. She opened her eyes, the mountain wind biting her face. But the voice was gone. Static filled the night again. She sat there a long time, staring at snow, wondering if she hated that answer more than she needed it. By dawn they were moving again, higher, colder, toward Widow's Peak. Each step was agony, each breath thin. Harrington stumbled constantly. Torres limped worse. Donovan carried more weight than a man should. Reeves never slowed. Sarah walked silent. But inside her mind, a war raged louder than bullets. Because she didn't know anymore who she was out here. The woman seal fighting for recognition. Or the woman already being replaced by a ghost. The ridge rose before them, forbidding and endless. Somewhere in the storm behind, hunters closed in. Somewhere in the silence ahead, a voice waited. And Sarah wondered, when it came down to the final stand, would it be her trigger that saved them? Or the ghost? Why did Widow's Peak feel like a grave before the battle even began? The mountain rose like a broken tooth, sharp and jagged against a bleeding sky. By the time they reached the plateau, the team was half shadows themselves, exhausted, cold, bleeding, and still hunted. Sarah's boots crunched over frozen stone. Her chest ached from the climb, her lungs burning in the thin air. She dropped her pack, rifle clutched close, eyes already sweeping the ridges. A sniper never waited to be told where to look. Reeves moved with grim precision, his voice sharp but measured. "Perimeter, ammo count." "Low," Donovan muttered, pulling spare magazines from a pouch. "Too low." Torres collapsed against a wall of ancient stone, his face gray with pain. Harrington huddled beside him, pale and trembling, his breath shallow. The man looked less like a physicist than a ghost dragged back from the grave. Sarah knelt by a natural parapet, unfolded her bipod, and pressed her cheek against the cold steel of her rifle. From this high, the Hindu Kush stretched endless, beautiful if beauty hadn't been turned into a killing ground. And that's when the voice returned. Calm, precise, cold as the mountain air. "Fox Squad, you're surrounded. 30 combatants, multiple vectors, mortars inbound in 12 minutes. Reeves froze, then keyed the old radio. "Who are you?" "You already know." Sarah closed her eyes, her breath hitched. "Ghost spotter." She wanted to hate that voice, but when it spoke, her pulse steadied. When it gave orders, her hand stopped trembling. She wasn't sure if it was relief or surrender. The first crack of distant rifles came from the south slope. Sarah adjusted her scope, breath slow, heartbeat steady. Movement, 6 hostiles, 200 meters. Her finger curled. One shot, then another. Two men dropped, the others scattering. She adjusted, fired again. Third fell. Reeves barked across the plateau. Reynolds, conserve, we'll need you later. But Sarah ignored him. For once, she wasn't the anomaly. For once, she wasn't silent in the back of a room. Her rifle was speaking now, and it spoke louder than any briefing table. And then another shot. Not hers, not from their plateau. From somewhere beyond. A hostile she hadn't even marked folded instantly, a red mist in the pale snow. Another, then another. Sarah's jaw clenched. It was her ghost spotter. Out there, invisible, doing the impossible. Reeves muttered into the radio, "Where are you?" "Watching." Sarah pressed her cheek harder against the stock. A cold knot formed in her chest. Watching, always watching. And Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting the enemy. She was fighting to prove she wasn't just a shadow in another woman's legend. The first mortar screamed down. Impact exploded stone into shards. They scrambled to cover. A second shell crashed closer. Dust filled Sarah's mouth, sharp and bitter. "North face," the voice hissed through the static. "Shift now. You have 40 seconds before correction fire." They moved, dragging Harrington, hauling Torres, scrambling over jagged rock. A third shell detonated behind them, erasing where they had been seconds earlier. Donovan spat into the dirt. How the hell does she see this? No one answered. Hours blurred into minutes, minutes into seconds. The plateau became a crucible. Each ridge spawned shadows. Each shadow birthed gunfire. Sarah fired until her shoulder went numb, her cheek bruised from the stock. Her ears rang with the rhythm of her own rifle and the distant, impossible cracks of the ghost. For every man Sarah dropped, the ghost dropped too. And though she tried to push it down, the truth clawed at her. She was better. Torres bled. Harrington shook. Donovan's voice cracked as he tried to keep comms alive. Reeves's commands grew shorter, harsher. Sarah fought in silence. Inside, though, her heart whispered questions louder than bullets. Why her, why not me? Why do I feel smaller in the presence of someone who isn't even here? And then she heard it. Not through the radio, not through her scope. Through her own bones. The ghost's words. "I remember what it feels like to be abandoned." The storm inside Sarah cracked. Because those were her words. Her memory, her wound. She wanted to scream into the static, "That's my life, not yours." But her throat locked. She pressed her face to her scope and pulled the trigger instead. A man fell, another froze. But no matter how many she killed, she couldn't silence the voice in her head. By nightfall, Widow's Peak burned with muzzle flashes. The cold air stank of cordite and blood. The stone walls trembled with impacts. Their ammunition was nearly gone. Reeves crouched beside Sarah, his face smeared with soot. His voice was quieter now. Not command, just truth. "We can't hold." Sarah kept her scope steady. "We don't have a choice." The radio hissed. The voice returned, sharper than before. "Enemy commander, East Ridge, 1 kilometer, Volkov." Sarah's heart seized. She shifted her scope east. Through haze, through distance, she saw him. White beard, military posture wrapped in civilian clothes. Calm, watching, directing. The man who had orchestrated this. The one the colonel had warned about. Reeves's voice rasped, "Can you take him?" Sarah breathed, held, calculated. Her hands shook. Her crosshairs trembled against his chest. It wasn't distance. It wasn't wind. It was her. And before she could steady herself, another shot rang out. Not hers. Volkov turned, calm as ever, and disappeared behind cover. Sarah's blood ran cold. The ghost had him in her scope. For 10 minutes, maybe longer, she hadn't fired. "Why?" Sarah whispered. Static answered. The fight surged again. Enemy fire intensified. Grenades arced into the plateau. Reeves pulled Harrington down. Donovan screamed a warning. Torres coughed blood. Sarah fired blind, her rifle clicking empty. She grabbed Torres' sidearm, her hands bloody, her chest tight. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something deeper. To matter. To prove that when history told this story, her name wouldn't vanish in static. But the mountain didn't care. Widow's Peak was swallowing them. And Sarah, chest heaving, eyes burning, whispered into the snow. Whose war is this, hers or mine? The wind didn't answer. But the assault didn't stop. Why didn't the mountain kill them that night? Widow's Peak should have swallowed them whole. By the time the firefight ebbed, the plateau was a scarred ruin, craters smoked, blood iced over in the snow. The men barely stood. Sarah crouched against a wall of stone, her rifle empty, her body trembling. Every nerve in her arms screamed, her chest burned from smoke. Her hands shook not from cold, but from exhaustion. She couldn't fight anymore. Reeves leaned beside her, face gray, lips cracked. He whispered, almost like confession. We can't hold another wave. Donovan staggered forward, radio still in hand, voice hoarse from calling for help that never came. Torres bled into the snow, his bandages soaked through. Harrington lay against the rock, muttering words that made no sense, his eyes glassy. Sarah looked at them, broken pieces of men, and wondered if this was the story. Not victory, not extraction, just erasure. And then, like before, the static cracked. South wall, there's an entrance. You have 2 minutes before they breach again. The voice, calm, unshaken, inhumanly steady. Reeves lifted his head. What entrance? Look for the split in the stone. Go. They didn't argue. Not anymore. The ghost had kept them alive too many times to doubt. Sarah shouldered Harrington's weight. His breath ragged against her neck and moved toward the southern edge. There, half buried in snow, was what looked like a fissure, narrow, jagged, impossible to see unless you knew where to look. They squeezed through one by one, scraping shoulders on stone. Darkness swallowed them whole. The cavern air was damp, cold, but quieter than the plateau above. Donovan clicked on a red lens light. Shadows stretched long across the walls. Strange markings cut into the stone, not natural. Lines, scratches, English letters half faded with time. Sarah traced them with gloved fingers. Names, dates. Soldiers who had come here before. Some from years she didn't recognize. Some from wars she hadn't been alive to see. And one name burned sharper than the rest. E. Carter. Sarah's breath caught. Her hand froze against the stone. It wasn't just rumor, not just whispers. Elizabeth Carter had been here years ago, alone. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know if it was awe or rage, because part of her wanted to smash the stone, erase the name, demand space for her own. Instead, she whispered it aloud. Carter. Reeves glanced back, his eyes narrowing. Donovan's jaw tightened. Even Torres, half-conscious, muttered a prayer under his breath. The ghost wasn't just a voice anymore. She was history carved into the walls. They pressed deeper into the tunnels. The ground sloped down, narrow, claustrophobic. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. Harrington groaned, clutching his side, the wound seeping again. Sarah helped him along, her thoughts storming. Why had Carter been here? What mission had carved her into stone? And why was she still here, 20 years later, unseen, unheard, but shaping their lives like she owned them? Her jaw clenched. She wasn't going to die as someone else's echo. When the tunnel widened into a cavern, the men collapsed. Donovan tended Torres. Reeves checked the map with shaking hands. Harrington curled up, whispering about Volkov, about secrets no one understood. Sarah set her rifle across her knees, back against cold stone, eyes scanning shadows. But her thoughts weren't on the enemy anymore. They were on the voice, the myth, and the question she couldn't kill. What if Ghost Spotter had been her, 20 years older, forgotten in the mountains until nothing was left but silence and precision? The radio crackled again. You're safe for now. Sarah's hands balled into fists. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Silence. Then, because I know what comes next. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted more, needed more, but the voice cut off. Hours passed in restless half-sleep. When dawn came, cold light filtered through cracks in the cavern roof. Snowflakes drifted down like ashes. Reeves roused them. We move again, East Ridge. Sarah stood, legs stiff, mind heavier than her body. She didn't look at the carved name as they passed. She couldn't. Outside, the world was white and endless. Their tracks would betray them within minutes. Donovan cursed softly. Torres limped. Harrington muttered. Reeves kept them moving. Sarah walked silent, her rifle heavy. But her silence wasn't discipline anymore. It was weight. The weight of knowing her place in history might already be occupied. The pursuit found them again by afternoon. Gunfire cracked across the ridge. They dropped to cover. Sarah pressed into snow, sighting fast, killing faster. Her rifle spoke the language she trusted. And yet every time her finger pressed, she listened for the other rifle, the ghost. It always came. Sharp, perfect, final. One hostile fell to Sarah's bullet. 2 more fell to Carter. Reeves shouted commands. Donovan dragged Harrington. Torres fired from the ground. But Sarah barely heard them. Her entire war was through her scope, chasing a voice she couldn't see. And then she saw it. A flash, distant, high ridge far side. The ghost's muzzle. For half a second, she thought she could see the shape of a woman behind it. But then it was gone. Her breath hitched. A part of her wanted to shout, to demand, show yourself, face me, don't haunt me. But the words stayed locked in her throat. By nightfall, they found a hollow beneath jagged stone and collapsed into it. Donovan passed out mid-radio attempt. Torres drifted, barely conscious. Harrington muttered dark secrets about experiments and Volkov, words no one wanted to understand. Reeves sat rigid, staring into dark. And Sarah? She curled her arms around her rifle, her face buried against the cold stock. Her chest shook, though she made no sound. Because for the first time, she wondered if survival mattered if no one remembered her. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the static cracked again. Rest, the voice whispered. I'll watch. Sarah closed her eyes, her lips trembling. But the tears never came. Because she hated the truth of it. That she trusted the ghost more than she trusted herself. Why was Harrington whispering her name? The night was black, the air sharp with frost, the men half dead from exhaustion. Sarah sat awake, her rifle across her knees when she heard it. Harrington, delirious, muttering through cracked lips. Reynolds, Reynolds, he said your name. Her chest tightened. She crawled closer, staring down at him. His skin glistened with fever, his wound oozing through the bandage. His eyes fluttered half shut, but his words spilled out in frantic gasps. Volkov, he knows you. He studied you. Said you'd be here. Said one woman would be his test. Sarah froze. What test? Harrington's hand gripped her sleeve weakly. Not just a tracker. Inside me, something else. Signal, beacon, data. He's watching. Reeves stirred awake. What's he saying? Sarah looked up, her voice tight. He's saying Volkov planned this, all of it. That Harrington isn't just cargo, he's bait. Silence fell heavy. Donovan cursed softly. Torres groaned in pain. Reeves's face hardened into stone. Sarah swallowed hard. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Was this whole mission already doomed before they stepped foot on the mountain? Hours later, they moved again. The moon hung thin and cruel over jagged ridges. Snow crunched under boots, masking nothing. They moved like ghosts themselves, hunted by something always a step ahead. Sarah walked at the rear, her rifle ready, her thoughts louder than the wind. Why her name? Why her? Why had Volkov chosen her, out of all of them, as his test? The voice came again. East slope, do not crest, they're waiting. Reeves signaled the team down. Sarah froze, heart hammering, as tracer fire shredded the ridgeline above. Dozens of rounds poured into the snow where they would have been seconds earlier. A perfect ambush, avoided only because of the ghost. They crawled through the dark, scraping their hands raw on frozen rock, until they reached a hollow below the slope. They regrouped, panting, shaking, faces pale with exhaustion. Reeves muttered into the radio, his voice low. "Why us? Why are you helping?" Silence answered, then. "Because I've seen this before. I know how it ends." Sarah's chest clenched. She wanted to shout, "No, you don't get to write my ending," but the words never left her mouth. When dawn came, pale light painted the peaks. The squad trudged forward, every step heavier than the last. Harrington stumbled constantly, muttering about signals, about being a transmitter. Donovan dragged him upright again and again until his own strength frayed. Then Sarah saw it. Fresh boot tracks, dozens, leading into the pass ahead. She froze. "We're walking into it." Reeves scanned the terrain, his eyes narrowing. "We don't have another option." They entered the pass. Stone walls rose on either side, sheer and unforgiving. Snow packed tight beneath their boots. Sarah's skin prickled. Her gut screamed. And then the first explosion tore through the world. The pass lit up with fire. Stone shards cut skin. Gunfire erupted from both ridges, echoing in thunder. Men shouted in a dozen tongues. Sarah dropped, rolled, sighted. Her rifle spat fire. One hostile down, another, but they kept coming. Shadows swarmed the ridges. Donovan screamed into the radio, but static swallowed him. Torres crawled to cover, blood soaking his thigh again. Reeves fired, calm but desperate. Harrington cowered, clutching his chest, his eyes wild with panic. And Sarah fired until her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded with hands shaking from cold and fury. This wasn't battle, this was slaughter. The radio hissed. "Left ridge, sniper, range 900, second rock outcrop." Sarah swung her scope, breath steady, heart wild. There he was, the sniper waiting. She fired, missed, fired again, closer. And then before she could adjust, the ghost shot cracked. Perfect, clean, final. The hostile toppled from the ridge. Sarah's chest collapsed in on itself. Her throat burned. Even here, even now, she couldn't match her. Bullets screamed past. Grenades shattered stone. The squad was being herded, pushed deeper into the kill box. Reeves barked orders, dragging Donovan toward cover. Sarah's scope blurred. Her vision swam. She pressed her cheek harder against the stock, teeth clenched, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had never broken in battle, not once. But now, under the shadow of a ghost, she felt it. "Fracture." Her voice broke in a whisper only she could hear. "Am I already gone?" The firefight raged on. Hours stretched like years. By the time the enemy withdrew, the pass was littered with bodies. Smoke hung thick. The squad was barely breathing, alive only by inches. Sarah sat in the snow, rifle across her lap, staring blankly at nothing. Her ears rang. Her eyes burned. Her chest felt hollow. The radio crackled. "You're not done yet. Volkov is close." Her head lifted slowly, eyes narrowing. Reeves glanced at her. Donovan, pale, nodded weakly. But Sarah said nothing. Inside, the storm was louder than the voice. She hated that she wanted it, hated that she needed it, hated that in her darkest moment it was the ghost's hand, not her own, pulling her out of the grave. And she hated most of all the truth whispering in her bones. That maybe Volkov was right. Maybe she wasn't a soldier. Maybe she was just a test. Why was Volkov letting them live? That question stalked Sarah as much as the bullets did. Every time they should have been wiped out, the ambush ended too soon. Every time the noose tightened, it loosened just enough. By the time they crawled from the bloodied pass into the gray dawn, Sarah's suspicion had hardened into certainty. He wasn't hunting them to kill them. He was hurting them. Snow crunched beneath boots as they dragged Harrington between them. Donovan's face was ashen, Torres limped half-conscious. Reeves pushed them forward with grim resolve. But Sarah walked in silence, her rifle cradled close, her mind replaying every word, every whisper from Harrington. Volkov studied you, said you'd be here, said one woman would be his test. Her name, spoken by a man she had never met. She hated how it felt, like her fate wasn't hers at all. The radio hissed suddenly. Keep north, the ridgeline is safer. Reeves obeyed without hesitation. Sarah's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream at him, stop listening to her, stop handing me over to someone who isn't even here. But the words caught in her throat. Because they had survived every time the voice commanded. Hours later they reached the ridgeline. Wind ripped across the stone, biting into flesh. Sarah dropped to her belly, scanning the valley below. And there, on the far slope, half-shrouded in mist, she saw him. Volkov. Calm still, watching. He didn't carry a rifle, didn't need to. Men swarmed around him, shadows in the snow. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, like a teacher observing children struggle with a lesson. Sarah's chest burned. Her finger pressed against the trigger. She could end it, right here, right now. Her scope steadied, her breath slowed, the world shrank to crosshairs. And then, don't. The voice sharp, final. Ghost spotter. Sarah's breath faltered. He wants you to shoot, the voice continued. That's the trap. If you fire, the mountain lights up, tripwires, overwatch, everything collapses. Sarah's hands shook, her teeth clenched. She whispered almost to herself. Then what do you want me to do? Hide. Watch you save us again. Silence. And then softer, I want you to live. Sarah's chest cracked open. A rage, raw and bitter, surged inside her. She whispered through clenched teeth. You already lived my story before I got here. You carved your name into stone, and now I'm just walking in your shadow. Reeves glanced at her, confused. Donovan frowned. Torres groaned, drifting in and out of consciousness. But Sarah didn't care. She pressed harder into the scope, ignoring the voice, ignoring everything. Her pride demanded the shot. Her pride demanded she prove she wasn't just another echo of a ghost. Her finger squeezed. And the rifle cracked. Volkov didn't fall. The bullet hit stone, sparking uselessly. And then the valley erupted. Explosions ripped the ridges. Mortars screamed. Gunfire poured down like rain. The squad dove for cover, shouting, dragging Harrington, firing blindly into the storm. Sarah's ears rang. Her chest heaved. And in the ringing silence after the first blast, she heard it. The ghost's voice, cold as steel. You did exactly what he wanted. Her stomach dropped. She pressed against the rock, her body trembling with fury and shame. Reeves pulled her close, shouting over the chaos. Reynolds, what the hell was that? Her throat locked. She couldn't answer, couldn't admit what she'd done. Because she hadn't fired at Volkov to save them. She had fired to save herself from being erased. And now men bled for it. Hours blurred. The squad barely survived the onslaught. By nightfall they were holed up in a broken cave, their supplies nearly gone, their strength nearly spent. Donovan tended Torres' leg with shaking hands. Harrington babbled feverish words about signals and experiments. Reeves sat stone still, his face unreadable. And Sarah. She sat alone, her rifle across her lap, her hands shaking. She thought of the name carved in stone. E. Carter. And she hated it. Because now she felt carved the same way, defined not by herself but by someone else's shadow. The radio crackled. You can still end this. Her breath hitched. How? Silence. Then by choosing who you are, not who I was. Her eyes burned. She wanted to scream into the static. But before she could, Reeves spoke. Tomorrow we go after Volkov. The words settled like final judgment. No one argued. Not Donovan, not Torres, not even Harrington. They were too broken to resist. Sarah's pulse hammered. Tomorrow, the final push, the final chance. She sat awake long into the night, staring at the horizon, the weight of pride and shame twisting in her chest. When dawn broke, the squad moved down the valley. The air felt thinner, the silence heavier. Volkov waited ahead, his trap already closing. And Sarah walked with the rifle in her hands, a question in her heart that felt heavier than death. Was she fighting to save her team, or to save herself from being forgotten? Why did the air feel heavier than bullets? The morning bled gray across the ridges as the squad stumbled down into the valley where Volkov waited. They were no longer soldiers. They were fragments of men. Donovan half-dragged Harrington. Torres limped on one good leg, his skin pale as snow. Reeves's face was carved into silence. And Sarah? Sarah carried her rifle, but her hands felt hollow. Her chest ached with shame. She had triggered the trap. She had fed Volkov exactly what he wanted, and she didn't know if she could ever silence the voice in her head that kept repeating it. The valley floor opened into a ruined outpost, stone walls shattered by decades of war, and in the center, calm as ever, stood Volkov. His white beard caught the light. His eyes burned with quiet intelligence. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. Dozens of fighters circled the ruins, rifles aimed, patient as wolves. Reeves stopped. His voice was low, even. "This is it." Sarah steadied her rifle, but Volkov's gaze found her instantly, as though she were the only one who existed. His lips curled faintly. "The experiment breathes," he said in accented English. "America sends men, but men break, so they send a woman. They hope something new survives." Her stomach twisted. He had studied her, known her, reduced her to a test tube in his private war. "You were supposed to be erased by the mountain," Volkov continued. "But you didn't. Why? Because someone else carried you." The static cracked. The ghost's voice sliced through the ruin. "Don't listen to him." Volkov smiled. "Ah, the phantom. Elizabeth Carter, my greatest failure. She was meant to die here, she did not. And now she is only a whisper." Sarah's chest burned, her throat tightened. Carter, real, alive, yet invisible. Volkov's eyes narrowed at Sarah. "You want to be remembered. Kill me. Take your shot. But know this, the world will not remember your bullet. They will only remember her voice guiding your hand." Her hands trembled against the stock. Pride and fury warred in her chest. She wanted to prove him wrong, wanted to prove she mattered. But then she looked sideways. Donovan's cracked lips, Torres' gray skin, Harrington's fevered body, Reeves's tired eyes. Her team, broken but breathing. And she realized they weren't her competition. They weren't her legacy. They were her responsibility. Her breath slowed, her chest stilled. She lowered the rifle. Volkov's eyes gleamed. "Ah, you choose restraint, but restraint is also death." And then the firefight erupted. Gunfire shredded the ruins. Mortars screamed. Dust and fire swallowed the valley. Donovan dragged Harrington behind shattered walls. Torres crawled, firing weakly. Reeves shouted over the chaos. Sarah pressed into stone, rifle steady again. Not for pride, not for memory, for them, for the living beside her. Through her scope, she tracked Volkov's fighters, cutting them down one by one. Her shots were slower now, calmer, measured by need instead of ego. And always, another rifle cracked in the distance, the ghost. Perfect, silent, deadly. But for the first time, Sarah didn't hate it. She didn't resent it, because she realized they weren't rivals. They were parallel lines in the same war. Volkov moved through the chaos like a conductor, shouting orders unshaken by fire. Sarah sighted him again, breath held, heart steady. This time she didn't pull the trigger for herself. She pulled it for the man who had tortured Harrington, for the men who had bled on these ridges, for Torres, Donovan, Reeves. The rifle cracked. Volkov staggered. Another shot rang out a split second later, the ghost. And together, their bullets found him. Volkov fell. The battlefield slowed. His fighters faltered. Some broke. Some fled. A few fought to the death, but without their conductor, their storm was only noise. Silence returned to the valley, heavy as snow. Sarah lowered her rifle, her chest trembling, her breath raw. Reeves approached her, eyes tired but steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand rested on her shoulder for just a moment, acknowledgment, nothing more. The static crackled. "You did it," the ghost's voice whispered. Sarah swallowed. "No, we did it." Silence. Then softer. "Remember this. Dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't wait for recognition, it simply acts." Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She whispered, "Where are you?" Static, then nothing. The voice was gone. Hours later, a rescue bird thundered into the valley, its blades scattering snow. The team limped aboard, broken but breathing. Harrington unconscious. Torres pale but alive. Donovan slumped in exhaustion. Reeves silent, unreadable. Sarah sat by the open door, rifle across her knees, staring at the mountains shrinking below. She thought of Carter, of the name carved into stone, of the voice that had haunted her through snow and fire. And she thought of herself, not as the first woman SEAL, not as a test, not as a rival, but as a soldier who had chosen to live for others, not for legacy. The mountains faded behind her. The war didn't. It never would. But she carried something out of Widow's Peak that no one could erase. Not pride, not recognition. Dignity. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.